understand how to look after you. I wish now that I wasn't going to Australia at all. I have a great mind to chuck the whole thing up. I would if my articles hadn't been signed. Oh, don't be so serious, Jim. You are like one of the heroes of those silly melodramas Mother used to be fond of acting in. I am not going to quarrel with you. I have seen him. Oh, to see him is perfect happiness. We won't quarrel. I know you would never harm anyone I love, would you? Not as long as you love him, I suppose, was the sullen answer. I shall love him forever, she cried. And he? Forever, too. He'd better. She shrank from him. Then she laughed and put her hand on his arm. He was merely a boy. She's 1 year older than him. At the Marble Arch, they hailed an omnibus, which left them close to their shabby home in the Euston Road. It was after 5 o'clock, and Sybil had to lie down for a couple of hours before acting. Jim insisted that she should do so. He said that he would sooner part with her when their mother was not present. She would be sure to make a scene, and he detested scenes of every kind. In Sybil's own room they parted. There was a jealousy in the lad's heart, and a fierce, murderous hatred of the stranger who, as it seemed to him, had come between them. Yet when her arms were flung round his neck and her fingers strayed through his hair, he softened and kissed her with real affection. There were tears in his eyes as he went downstairs. Pause. That's an oddly romantic parting for a brother and sister, but you got to remember that the Victorian age was a more melodramatic age than our time. Like, John Wayne curb-stomped emotion in 1930, and now we don't express it in the same way that they did in Victorian times. Look at like Civil War diaries and journals and Victorian stuff, and you'll see that people were more comfortable with emotion and expressing emotion back then than they are now in modern Western society. So, I just wanted to footnote that. And you can see that when you go back and you read Romantic era and Victorian era literature. For example, if you read Pride and Prejudice, there's this guy, Mr. Darcy, and his best friend, Mr. Bingley, and they have a really close relationship. They're BFFs in the same way that, girls, I guess, are still allowed to have BFFs here. And they can express emotions that in modern-day America, people start snickering and making, bromance comments and stuff like that. I think it's foolish that we've put this prohibition on expression of emotion, but, that's my 2 cents. Back to it. There were tears in his eyes as he went downstairs. His mother was waiting for him below. She grumbled at his unpunctuality as he entered. He made no answer, but sat down to his to his meager meal. The flies buzzed round the table and crawled over the stained cloth. Through the rumble of omnibuses and the clatter of street cabs, he could hear the droning voice devouring each minute that was left to him. Obviously, that's a personification as well. The mom is devouring the minutes as he's devouring the food. She's also grumbling that he was late because he was like, I want my food at 5. And he gets there and it's late. After some time, he thrust away his plate and put his head in his hands. He felt that he had a right to know. We're going back to that little bit earlier where he suspected something from his mom. He felt that he had a right to know. It should have been told to him before. If it was as he suspected. Leaden with fear, his mother watched him. Words dropped mechanically from her lips. A tattered lace handkerchief twitched in her fingers. When the clock struck 6, he got up, went to the door. Then he turned back and looked at her. Their eyes met. In hers, he saw a wild appeal for mercy. It enraged him. Mother, I have something to ask you, he said. Her eyes wandered vaguely about the room. She made no answer. Tell me the truth. I have a right to know. Were you married to my father? She heaved a deep sigh. It was a sigh of relief. The terrible moment, the moment that night and day for weeks and months she had dreaded, had come at last. And yet she felt no terror. Indeed, in some measure, it was a disappointment to her. The vulgar directness of the question called for a direct answer. The situation had not been gradually led up to. It was crude. It reminded her of a bad rehearsal. No, she answered, wondering at the harsh simplicity of life. My father was a scoundrel then, cried the lad, clenching his fists. She shook her head. I knew he was not free. We loved each other very much. If he had lived, he would have made provision for us. Don't speak against him, my son. He was your father and a gentleman. Indeed, he was highly connected. Pause again. James hates gentlemen by some sort of race instinct, but it turns out that his dad is a gentleman, which is sort of ironic, I guess. But this connects to Sybil's situation. There's definitely an overlap between her mom and what's going on with her right now with Dorian. An oath broke from his lips. I don't care for myself, he exclaimed, but don't let Sybil, it's a gentleman, isn't it, who's in love with her, or says he is, Highly connected, too, I suppose. For a moment, a hideous sense of humiliation came over the woman. Her head drooped. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Sybil has a mother," she murmured. "I had none." The lad was touched. He went toward her, and stooping down, he kissed her. "I am sorry if I have pained you by asking about my father," he said. "But I could not help it. I must go now. Goodbye. Don't forget that you will have only one child now to look after. And believe me that if this man wrongs my sister, I will find out who he is, track him down, and kill him like a dog. I swear it." Oscar Wilde has given us this twice now. You gotta believe something's gonna come of this. The exaggerated folly of the threat, the passionate gesture that accompanied it, the mad melodramatic words made life seem more vivid to her. She was familiar with the atmosphere. She breathed more freely, and for the first time for many months she really admired her son. She would have liked to have continued the scene on the same emotional scale, but he cut her short. Trunks had to be carried down and mufflers looked for. The lodging house drudge bustled in and out. There was the bargaining with the cabman. The moment was lost in vulgar details. It was with renewed feeling of disappointment that she waved the tattered lace handkerchief from the window as her son drove away. Think about how theatrical that gesture is, too. The mom lives in a world that is more theater than reality, and the reality cuts away from the theatricalness that she wants her life to have, and that it doesn't. Her son lives more in reality, and he finds the theater absurd. Sybil is definitely more like her mother. And she's been characterized very well, I think, throughout this chapter in that way. Anyway, she was conscious that a great opportunity had been wasted. She consoled herself by telling Sybil how desolate she felt her life would be now that she had only one child to look after. She remembered the phrase. It had pleased her. Of the threat, she said nothing. It was vividly and dramatically expressed. She felt that they would all laugh at it someday. Yeah. I'll kill him like a dog. We're all going to laugh at that someday. They're all going to be like in the house and be like, "Oh, remember the time you threatened to kill Dorian like a dog?" Yeah. But that's how the chapter ends. With a callback to the threat. Obviously, that's the key moment of the chapter as a whole. We characterize Sybil, we characterize James, we see how the Vanes live. And I think the intentional contrast here between the Vane household and how Dorian and Lord Henry and Basil live is really important. We got the flies buzzing around at dinner and all of that kind of stuff. Clearly, we have this juxtaposition, this intentional contrast between two ways of life. And where Sybil comes from versus where Dorian comes from. So that's going to be important. Anyway, gonna send you off. This is the last broadcast for the week, so I will come back on Monday with Chapter 6, and we'll continue to go through the Picture of Dorian Gray. Hopefully you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying doing it, and for the most part, I'm just doing it to do it. I wanted to read the book again. I used to teach it every year, but I haven't for about 5 years, maybe longer. And it's great to get back into it. It's one of my favorite books, and it's still enjoyable. No matter how many times you read it, you see more things in there. You see more of what Oscar Wilde was doing. And I think that's one of the flaws or failings of an educational system, any educational system, really. Like, we struggle because, you can't read things more than once. There isn't time. We're always in a rush to get to the next unit or the next thing or the next, whatever it happens to be. And I'm as knowledgeable as I am about literature because I've read these things, 20, 30, times. And every time you read it, you see more, you understand more, you get a better picture. And everybody else is being introduced to it for the first time. They're reading it once. And in reading it once, you can get so much out of it and you can enjoy it, but you can't really understand it. And we live in a world where there's never time for second and third perusals of material. We're always giving it to you the first time and expecting you to understand it and telling you to love it, and that's difficult stuff. And anyway, maybe this being home in quarantine gives you time to love and enjoy and indulge yourself a little bit more than we allow you to do in school. Yeah. Well, I guess that's a rant. I'm gonna call this off and turn things off. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and that everybody stays healthy and safe. And yeah. So that's it for me and from Crosby up there. Hey, Cross. No, he won't look at us. I'll see you later. Bye.